to another episode of Access-Ability. I'm your host Laura. I'm a white woman with bright blue hair, shaved on one side, wearing a plain black dress. If you're someone who owns a VR headset or has spent time with someone who owns a VR headset and has gone, what are some good family-friendly, comedic, light-hearted beginner VR games that I could try playing? You've probably either tried or been recommended one of Alchemy Labs' VR games. Best known for titles such as Job Simulator or Vacation Simulator, where players interact with a world full of robots trying their very best to replicate, kind of poorly, what life was like on Earth with humans. Alchemy Labs have also recently released a game called Cosmonious High, where you play as someone who has recently crash-landed in an alien high school and now has to make do with all sorts of alien shenanigans going on around you. During last week's E3 adjacent Upload VR showcase, it was announced that Alchemy Labs had been developing and has now released an accessibility-focused update for Cosmonious High. Now, we've talked on this channel before about the fact that VR is inherently a kind of inaccessible place to play a lot of kinds of video games. That being said, Cosmonious High's accessibility update is actually pretty impressive. I was very impressed by the way that Alchemy Labs seems to have addressed this accessibility update, some of the kinds of things they've kept in mind while working on it, and I'm pleasantly surprised to say that they have made a big step forward with Cosmonious High in terms of trying to make it more accessible, particularly when you compare it to some of their past games like Job Simulator or Vacation Simulator. So today, on Access-Ability, we're going to be talking about the recent accessibility update that came to Cosmonious High. We're going to talk about what settings were added to the game and what changes were made to make it more accessible to disabled players. We're going to talk about some of the changes we'd still like to see from Alchemy Labs, particularly across some of their other VR titles. And we're going to talk about the ways that these kinds of accommodations can help to make VR games more accessible, even if generally VR gaming still has accessibility hurdles to be overcome. First up, before getting into any of the specific changes in this update, I wanted to note how nice it was seeing Alchemy Labs acknowledge in their latest trailer that accessibility options need to consider both players with permanent disabilities, as well as those with temporary or situational disabilities. We recently dedicated an episode of Access-Ability to that very topic, and it's rare to see that directly acknowledged by game developers. So, what changes does this update actually make to Cosmonious High? Well, one of the major changes provided in the update is a one-handed mode option, which allows the entire game to be played start to finish using a single controller rather than two. This comes alongside a bunch of situational changes to the game, so that even if a player is not explicitly playing the game using only one controller, scenes are often, by default, now completable that way. Additionally, to better support seated play, Cosmonious High now includes handles on every table, desk, or similar surface, allowing their heights to be changed on the fly. This helps to ensure that players do not find themselves in a situation where an item, interactable, or button is out of their reach or out of their line of sight. Iconography has also been changed and improved to help make navigating the game easier for anyone who struggles with reading in-game text, and more visual tutorials have been added to help any player who finds it easier to learn by following along with visual prompts than by reading. Beyond those changes, the newest update also makes character pronouns more clearly visible next to character names while playing, which is just a really nice welcome change. Now, all of the changes in this update are really positive, but it's still important to consider them in the wider context of VR gaming as well as Alchemy Labs' other releases. At present, these new accessibility updates have only been added to Cosmonious High, Alchemy Labs' most recent release, and not to any of their back catalogue of VR releases. While I recognise that that would require an investment of additional development resources for older games, it would be really nice if eventually we see these updates added to more of their back catalogue of titles. Additionally, it's important to remember that while an individual VR game can make moves like this to improve accessibility, there are many fundamental aspects of VR game design which can be limiting to a number of disabled players. These are positive steps forward for Cosmonious High, but they exist within the limitations of being a game that is exclusive to hardware that expects motion-controlled gameplay and stereo vision from players. At the end of the day, I'm really happy to see a family-focused, well-rated game developer in VR such as Alchemy Labs try and tackle accessibility in VR in such a thoughtful way. Granted, there are still some inherent inaccessible aspects of VR that I don't think Alchemy Labs themselves can necessarily do a huge amount about, but I think that if every game developer making a VR game were to look at something like Cosmonious High and try to at the very least be as accessible as that game is aiming to be, it wouldn't fix all the problems with VR accessibility, but it would get us a lot closer to VR being accessible than it is today, and I think that Alchemy Labs deserve some credit for that. They've created a set of accessibility settings updates here that definitely increase the range of people who can play, and while accessibility is really on the rise in the overall games industry, it really is still a rarity to see VR game developers in particular stop and think about what they can do to make their platform more accessible, and seeing a developer like Alchemy Labs step up like this is really, really heartwarming. It gives me a lot of hope. My main hope going forward is actually nothing to do with Cosmonious High itself. It's the hope that Alchemy Labs will find the time and the resources to basically go and put a lot of this accessibility-focused content into their older titles. I recognise going back and doing this kind of work to a game that is already out, has already sold a lot of the copies it's going to sell, is a harder financial prospect to justify, but a lot of Alchemy Labs games are very accessible in a general sense to a lot of people, and I think if these accessibility updates were added back into those games, I think it would make a lot of their back catalogue really stand out as a great place to start pointing people who are disabled and are looking for good, accessible places to start with VR gaming.